I can't imagine myself living in the United States ever again, but I can imagine myself spending the rest of my life in Latin America. Here's why. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lau or Profe Lau. I grew up in the United States. I lived there until I was 20, and then I left and lived in Latin America for 7 years approximately. I lived in different countries, primarily in Ecuador, but I also spent time in Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. I've talked to hundreds of people from all over Latin America. I am generalizing in this video about Latin America because it consists of many countries. Not every country in Latin America has what I'm going to be talking about in this video, or it might not apply, but it's just based on my general experience. So the first thing that I prefer in Latin America is walkability. This is a great word, isn't it? Walkability. The ability to walk around, to walk to the store, to walk anywhere you need to go. You're going to see more people walking around, walking out and about. And this goes for big cities as well as small towns. The thing is that the way it is in my experience in Latin America is the people live in towns and cities where everything is closer together. So it's easier to walk around. Yeah, of course, you can live way out in the countryside where it's not so easy maybe to walk to a store. Of course, you can live super rural like that. But there often are little stores here and there, or little places where local farmers will sell their, fruits and vegetables and stuff. So it's doable. I spent most of my time in Ecuador, which was 5.5 years, living in rural places, living in small towns. I actually lived in the Amazon for 4 years. I was always like a 20-minute bus ride from the nearest town or city that had everything. It had hospitals and everything you need. So I wasn't that isolated. But even being on the countryside, there was always like some little store within walking distance, maybe just like a little corner store, a little store that has like some basic essential things. And I mean, you can find that in the United States too, but I just feel like they don't have as good of a selection. And well, maybe it's cold and you don't really want to walk, or it's like snowing, because I'm from the north of the US, so it's not as good for walking to the store. But also everything is just farther. Everything is more spread out. Like I grew up in a small town in Maine, but I feel like everything was so far away. Like all of my friends from school lived so far from me. I couldn't just walk to their house. There were some kids on my road, but we weren't really friends, so we didn't really hang out much sometimes. But the friends that I had at school, I was just too far from. I couldn't go to their house, even though we were all technically in the same town. In a small town in Latin America, there's usually a school, and you go by the school and you see all the kids, and they're all like walking home together. It would always be in the Amazon, and like this big group of little kids would always walk by me on their way, walking home, and they would always say like buenas tardes, like good afternoon. It's just so cute to see them all with their little backpacks, and they all live close to each other, and then they go to school together, they walk to school together, they walk home together, and they're always together, and they're not that far from each other. In my town, we had a lot of different buses just for different parts of the town. So none of my friends were on my school bus because they lived in a different part of town. So I only saw my friends at school, but of course our time at school was limited. So we really had to plan to hang out outside of school, and we had to ask our parents to drive us to see each other because we couldn't just like go to each other's houses or walk home from school. So it really felt extremely limited socially. I felt often like I was just trapped in my house, my little house in the woods, and I couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't do anything. Continuing with that similar idea, I want to talk about public transportation. This is another huge problem in the United States. Basically, there's no public transportation in the United States outside of very urban areas. So in very urban city areas, you do have maybe a metro if you live in a really big city, or you have city buses. But a lot of people in the United States just simply don't live in those urban areas. Actually, like the original American dream, which I don't know if it's really still alive, but that was to live in the suburbs with your family, not to live in these super urban areas. So a lot of people that have families and have kids, they live in the suburbs or they live in the countryside. Basically, you need to have a car. I feel like we all know this by now. I feel like I'm not saying anything new, but United States, you have to have a car. It's all based around having a car. The whole country was like built around everybody having a car, the whole system with the roads and the giant parking lots. And personally, I love not having a car. Like I lived in the countryside for years in Latin America and relied almost exclusively on buses with the occasional taxi ride. They have like colectivos sometimes in some places, like in Mexico, super cheap, like shared taxi. It's just so easy. It's just so convenient to use public transportation. And anywhere you are, even in the countryside, you don't need to have a car. Obviously, it's going to make life easier in some ways if you have a car, but you don't need it. I generally just feel like transportation, period, is easier in Latin America. Also, especially because of the more tropical climates, you can have like a motorcycle. There are moto taxis, like in Colombia, for example. There's a lot of options that just don't exist in the US. To live in the United States, you're just gonna end up having a car. But there's a really high risk of getting in an accident. Like every day I would see car accidents on the highways, on the side of the road. It's extremely common. The car accidents happen all the time in the US because there's just so many cars on the road, and some parts of the country, they have like 4, 5, 6 lane highways. It looks like such a big waste of metal and material, and we're all going to like relatively the same part of town, the same area, and we just have all these cars, like 5 lanes of cars, and we're all just one person in each car. It just doesn't seem efficient. It seems silly. And you'd think that for United States claiming to be a developed country, that it would have a much more developed transportation system. I don't know, maybe like some high-speed trains, some like really nice trains that go everywhere, like some countries in Asia have, and Europe. In that aspect, I think the US is extremely underdeveloped. Even though Latin America might not have the most developed transportation system in the world, I still prefer the way it is now than in the United States. The next thing that I prefer in Latin America is one of my favorite things. This changes depending on the country and the region, but generally fruit and vegetables and produce and farmers markets are much more abundant and accessible and affordable than in the United States. The United States, farmers markets is more of like a luxury thing. It's often more expensive. It's often only available in very specific places on very specific days. It's something that you have to like research and figure out, like, okay, where are the farmers markets? Because it's not something that everybody participates in. It's not just a normal aspect of life like it is in Latin America. In Latin America, these markets are often open all the time, every day. People are selling fresh produce from their farm. It's often cheaper than going to the store. Additionally, you can find small stores that specifically just sell produce, like fruterias and these little tiendas that have fruits and vegetables. In Ecuador, you can find those on every single corner. I think it was more accessible there than anywhere else. But even like in Argentina, I was expecting there to not be so many fruterias everywhere, like little fruit stores. And actually, I was surprised. There were a lot. In the United States, we basically don't have little fruit stores. We don't have fruit and vegetable stores. We don't have a lot of small stores in general, right? We just have these giant grocery stores, supermarkets. So anytime you need fruits or vegetables, little basic food items, you always have to go to the supermarket. Because what are you going to go to the gas station? You're going to get a bag of chips, like you're going to get some ice cream, you're going to get some junk food. We don't have healthy food at little convenience stores and gas stations. So you have to go to the grocery store. That's like the only place you can get real food. And even a lot of the produce, a lot of the food at the grocery store is a little suspicious and sometimes doesn't taste very good and just not as good quality as in Latin America as well. One of my favorite things about being in Mexico is going to the tianguis, the big street market where you can get all your groceries, all your produce. Every day in Ecuador, I could go to town and I could see people selling stuff from their farm every single day. You could buy stuff right from the jungle, like I was in the Amazon, ayahuasca in a bottle, to rare jungle fruits and medicine, to all kinds of things. They're basic, bananas, papayas. They're selling chicha, like the drink, fermented drink. I love market culture and I really hope it doesn't go away. And I'm scared for future generations. I'm afraid that we're going to be losing this in Latin America. It's going to become more like the United States. And I hope that doesn't happen, but if it does happen, I hope at least we still maintain the fruterias. I hope we still have all these little stores everywhere and it's not going to be just like everything at the grocery store and that's it. Everything at the big supermarket and that's it. That would be really sad. But until that happens, if it does happen, Latin America is better than the United States in that aspect. Also, the fact that it's a lot of it is tropical and you can get tropical fruits much more easily than you can get in the United States. You can get fruits that you can't even find in the US and much better quality and much cheaper. It's sad. A lot of my family has only had the really horrible mangoes that they sell in the grocery store in Maine, where I'm from. To me, those mangoes are just absolute trash. Even if they're shipped in from from like Mexico or wherever, there's still just like horrible mangoes. I have really high standards for fruit. It's just like you have to go to the country and you have to find the good fruit. I spent my whole childhood without ever having a fresh mango, a papaya. I never knew what these were, you know, I never tried more than one kind of banana. I don't want to live like that ever again. So I want to live in a place with abundant tropical fruit that's very accessible and affordable and good quality. The next reason why I love most of Latin America is the climate. I really like warm tropical climate, but the cool thing about Latin America is that there's a lot of elevation, there's a lot of mountains. So if you get tired of the heat or you want something a little bit in between, like not too cold, not too hot, a lot of the more popular cities in Latin America are actually at an elevation that create this kind of eternal spring type climate. Or even like living in the Andes or, you know, places that are a bit cold, especially in the nighttime. It's still not as cold as where I'm from in Maine. You know, it doesn't get snow. It's not freezing cold. So it's really nice. I feel like no matter what your preferences are, you can find a climate that you really love in Latin America. The United States, you have different kinds of climates, of course, but the South is just extremely hot in the summer and the North is extremely cold in the winter. So you have these extremes. When I was in Ecuador and Colombia and Mexico, I never experienced so much heat as they experience in the south of the United States in the summer. So people tend to think that, oh, just because you're, you know, near the equator, it's going to be super hot. It's just not true because there's just so much elevation in these countries. I've actually been really cold a lot, like traveling in the Andes and being in Mexico City sometimes, and even Oaxaca City in the nighttime in the winter. Yeah, it gets cold. Quito in Ecuador is really freaking cold. Quito is a really cold city. The next thing that's better in Latin America than the US is the healthcare. Okay, this is a huge topic. The healthcare in the US is just so disproportional to the salary. The cost of it is just absolutely insane. It's a joke. It's a laughingstock of the world. And the quality is just average. It's actually not better. The quality is not proportional to the cost. I got cavities fixed in my teeth in Ecuador for like $20 a tooth. $20 is like 1 day of minimum wage salary in Ecuador, okay? To fix a tooth in the US is not the cost of 1 day of minimum wage salary in the US. We wish. No, it's more than that. You need to have health insurance or you're screwed. When I was in Buenos Aires, I got a doctor checkup. I think it was like $10. Seriously, like $10. Even when I was in Mexico City, I was in one of the more expensive neighborhoods, Roma, and I went to a dentist in that neighborhood and I got a wisdom tooth pulled for like $100. And I'm sure you can get it way cheaper in a different part of the city or in a different part of Mexico. But that was like the expensive dentist cost was like $100 to get a tooth pulled. Also, the service, in my experience, is better. I had a more one-on-one genuine interaction with the dentist, the doctor. I felt they weren't rushing me. I felt like I could ask them anything or talk to them about anything. Another thing that's horrible about US healthcare is that when you try to book an appointment, they're often booked for months. So you have to schedule an appointment for like 3 months from now. They don't have much availability. But anytime in Latin America that I needed to schedule an appointment, I literally just look them up on Google Maps. I get their number. I usually just text them on WhatsApp and say, like, when are you available? They usually tell me either that day or the next day or within like 1 to 2 days they're available. And we schedule the appointment and I go and they see me immediately. And then even after the appointment, oftentimes they will message you or you can just text them to schedule like a follow-up appointment if you need. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I have gotten the general impression that in a lot of countries in Latin America, there is a free public healthcare and there's also private healthcare that you could pay for. So you have like 2 different options. I'm not even asking for free healthcare in the US. I'm just asking for affordable healthcare, and it's not. And I would be very afraid to live there, especially as I get older. And I have heard of a lot of older people leaving the US because of the healthcare, because it's just way too expensive and they find just as good care a lot more affordable in other countries. That's actually one of the top reasons of why a lot of older, like retired people from the US will leave the country. The final thing that I love about Latin America and I prefer, it's really personal to me. Okay, this might not matter to you, but to me, I just love Spanish. And I also love Portuguese. I speak Spanish and I also speak Portuguese, not as fluent, but I'm working on it. I just love these languages so much, and I love especially how they're spoken in Latin America as opposed to in Europe. I really love living in countries where I can practice and use my language skills all the time, and I can always improve, and people are just very happy to talk to me and help me with that. And also a lot of them either know some English or some other language, or they think that it's important or it's good to learn another language. And maybe partially because of, it's been taught to them that they should learn English. But it's just refreshing after living in the United States and being among a lot of people who only speak English and have absolutely no motivation to learn another language. It's hard for me to connect to these kind of people. I think a lot of people in the US, not everybody, but I think there are a lot of people, especially older generations, they're living in this kind of United States bubble where that is like their whole reality, their whole world, and they don't really think about anything outside of that. I think it really blocks their development as a person, and as somebody who travels to many different countries and tries to learn other languages, it's kind of hard for me to connect to those kind of people. I connect more with like people of the world, not just people from the United States. I connect with travelers and people who have, a broader reference of what life looks like. I think it's really important for us to have that. But yes, also just for selfish reasons, I love living in countries that speak Spanish because I can speak Spanish and I love speaking Spanish. So I'm sure that there are other reasons why I prefer Latin America over the US. There's also things I prefer in the US compared to Latin America. So it's not like everything is perfect in Latin America and everything's bad in the US. Of course not. There are pros and cons to living in both places. If you live in the US and you love living there, fantastic. You got to listen to what feels right for you. I'm just sharing in this video why I don't think I will live in the US ever again. As much as my family doesn't want to hear that and would love for me to live there, it just doesn't feel right for me and my journey in my life. If you're learning English, if you're working on your English comprehension, you can tell me in the comments how much you understood. I'm sure you guys will also tell me about your opinions and what you think. I understand that I'm coming to this topic with some privilege. I have the privilege of being able to choose which one. Some people don't even have the option of really being able to choose the United States. But I don't think I have the privilege of money, being able to live in Latin America with so much more money, which makes it better. Because actually the entire time I lived in Ecuador, I was making basically like an Ecuadorian's minimum wage salary. I was not making very much money. If I have to make minimum wage and have a low salary, I would rather do that in Latin America than in the US, because it will still be easier for me in Latin America to find a cheap room to rent, to use public transportation, to walk, to get healthcare. If you live on minimum wage in the US, you're probably going to struggle a lot more. You can't even go get like a cheap almuerzo at like a little local restaurant. We don't have that in the US, where they make one meal for everybody. Therefore, it's cheaper and you can go have that for lunch, and then you can go get cheap quality food at the farmer's market. Also, if you need to make money, you can always sell things on the street in Latin America. You can't in the US. You're not allowed to just go out and sell things on the street. So because of this, I always say if you're going to be poor, it's better to be poor in Latin America than in the United States. The United States has a huge homelessness problem now. All right, so that's basically everything I wanted to say in this video. I probably forgot some things, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. And yeah, turn on the notifications so you know when I post another video. All right, see you. Bye-bye.